Snow drifted across the lonely stretch of Wyoming prairie, moving with the slow certainty of something ancient and unbothered by human sorrow. Cole Maddox watched it gather against the warped porch boards, each flake whispering against wood worn smooth by years of storms. The ranch looked smaller every winter, as if shrinking away from him, and he felt a familiar tug of emptiness in his chest, the kind that settled in deep and refused to thaw. He lit the lone lantern in his cabin, its glow flickering over an empty table set for two before he quietly removed the second plate and tucked it back into the cupboard. He told himself it didn't matter anymore, yet he still hesitated as he closed the door, as though waiting for someone he knew would never come. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying with it a low, rhythmic pulse, far-off drumbeats that rose and fell like a heartbeat under the snow. Cole stiffened. Those sounds hadn't swept across his valley since he was a boy. He stepped into the doorway and listened harder, wondering if memory was playing tricks on him again. The rhythm faded, leaving only the hush of winter, but something in the stillness felt different tonight, as if the land were holding its breath. He rubbed his hands together, searching for warmth that wasn't just physical, and felt a prickling unease, a sense that the night was watching him from just beyond the reach of his lantern. He tried to shake it off, turning toward the barn to check on the livestock before the cold deepened. Halfway there he stopped. Fresh tracks dotted the snow, small, precise, lighter than any boot he knew. They crossed his yard in a wandering path toward the paddock before vanishing completely, swallowed by the rising drifts. Cole knelt, fingertips brushing the delicate impressions, and felt a faint ripple of curiosity under his caution. Someone had been here, close enough to touch, yet had disappeared as abruptly as a breath on glass. He rose slowly, scanning the pale horizon, but saw nothing but darkness and the suggestion of movement in the swirling white. A low whicker reached him from the barn, trembling with something beyond simple discomfort. Cole hurried toward the sound, boots crunching through the brittle crust of snow, and pushed the barn door open. The lantern inside cast a soft circle of gold around his old mare, Daisy, who lay on her side breathing hard. But it wasn't the mare that made Cole freeze. Kneeling beside her, illuminated like a figure pulled from a dream, was a young Apache woman with a braid of glossy black hair falling over one shoulder. Her palms glowed with reflected lantern light as she pressed them gently against the mare's flank. She didn't look up when Cole entered, as though she had known he was coming long before he arrived. Her breath flowed in slow, steady streams, clouding in the cold air. She whispered in her own language, voice soft and low, and the mare's trembling eased as if soothed by the sound. Only when she sensed Cole's presence did she turn her gaze toward him. Her eyes held an unsettling calm, dark, steady, and threaded with something like fire beneath frost. She didn't flinch or explain herself. Instead, she stroked the mare with a reverent patience that made Cole's throat tighten. She said her name was Nayeli Redbird, and that she had followed the injured horse since morning so it wouldn't die alone. The simple grace in her voice left him unsure of what to say next, his tongue clumsy in the heavy quiet. Cole moved closer, drawn by something he didn't fully understand. He lifted the lantern to see better, and for a moment the barn felt suspended outside of time, the wind muted, the world narrowed to the soft rise and fall of Daisy's breath and the steady fingers of this stranger tending to her. Cole finally managed to thank her, awkward and uncertain, but Nayeli simply nodded and shifted her weight so he could kneel beside her. Snow melted from her clothing in tiny droplets that glittered in the lamplight. She looked as though she belonged to the storm outside and yet had stepped gently into his life without disturbing a thing. When she finally spoke again, her voice carried that same tremor he had heard in the drumbeats. "You shouldn't be alone out here tonight, Cole Maddox. Someone might need you." Something in the way she said it made the back of his neck prickle, as if her words were both warning and invitation. They managed to get Daisy comfortable, though the mare's strength was failing. Cole offered Nayeli shelter from the worsening storm, and she accepted without hesitation, walking beside him through the deepening snow. The wind moaned softly against the cabin walls as they entered, and the lantern's glow stretched into corners it hadn't touched in years, revealing dust, faded memories, and a life quietly unraveling. Nayeli moved with deliberate gentleness, warming her fingers near the hearth, her sharp gaze taking in the smallness of his home. When she noticed the extra plate he'd forgotten to hide, Cole opened his mouth to offer an explanation, but the shame in his throat made the words falter. She didn't ask about it. Instead, she simply murmured something soft, something like understanding, and reached to steady a mug he had knocked askew. But she kept glancing toward the door, shoulders tightening whenever the wind shifted. Cole noticed. He said nothing at first, letting the silence breathe between them, though worry curled low in his gut. She thanked him for the warmth, her voice a little steadier, then asked if she could step outside for a breath of air. The question carried no visible fear, yet her eyes flickered to the trees beyond the fence line. Cole opened the door for her, and a sharp gust tore through the cabin, rattling the boards. She froze, listening intently. Then, with a voice thin as a shadow, she whispered, "They're closer than I hoped." A chill that had nothing to do with winter threaded through Cole's ribs. When she finally explained, it was with the weary resignation of someone being hunted not for wrongdoing but for defiance. She had fled her tribe's arranged match, a union she feared for reasons she struggled to voice. The elders had sent men after her, men who believed tradition outweighed choice. Cole felt something inside him shift as she spoke, the story of her flight layering itself against the story of his own quiet exile. He understood too well what it meant to be seen as lacking, to be told you do not fit, to lose pieces of yourself in the shadow of others' expectations. The soft determination in Nayeli's expression, her refusal to surrender her freedom, rested on him like a warmth he did not know how to deserve. He offered her food and a blanket without pressing her for more. The gesture felt small, almost pitiful, but she accepted it with a reverence that made his chest ache. They ate in silence except for the crackle of the fire, each lost in private thoughts. The closeness did something subtle between them, something neither named. Nayeli watched the flames dance, her expression thoughtful, and then asked if she could see the ranch properly, just a small walk even in the dark. She said she wanted to understand the place that had kept him alive through so many winters. Something about the request softened Cole's stiff interior, and he agreed before he even realized he'd spoken. The wind slapped them gently as they stepped outside. Snow twirled in slow spirals around the lantern, giving the world a ghostly luminescence. Then Cole heard it, the distant crunch of hooves. Shapes emerged through the storm, riders moving with grim purpose. Nayeli's breath hitched, though she masked it quickly. Cole felt an unfamiliar heat rise in him. He had no intention of reaching for his rifle, not when violence would only deepen the wound. Instead, he stepped forward, body steady, heart unsteady, and waited as the men approached. The riders halted a few yards away, their torches spitting sparks into the snow. Their leader demanded Nayeli return with them, voice sharp with authority. Cole answered without bravado, without even raising his voice. "She's safe here," he said, and the simplicity of those words rooted him. Nayeli stepped beside him, shoulders squared, meeting the riders' glares with quiet courage. Cole could feel her trembling, but she didn't retreat. The men began to dismount, movements heavy with intent, their boots sinking into the snow like weights dropped into water. Nayeli turned to Cole then, eyes wide but clear. "If they take me," she whispered, "I will not be myself anymore." She swallowed, breath thin. Will you marry me under frontier law? And under my people's vow? If we marry, they cannot claim me. Not tonight. Not ever." Her words landed like a heartbeat against his ribs. Cole felt the world shift beneath him, not with fear but with possibility, raw, unexpected, terrifying in its tenderness. She wasn't asking out of desperation alone, she was offering trust, offering a future carved by choice rather than force. He didn't hesitate long. The riders were advancing, lantern light glinting off their coats, demanding an answer. Cole took Nayeli's cold hand in his, and together they stepped into the open snow. She unwound a red cord from her wrist, fingers trembling as she wrapped it around their joined hands. His voice wavered as he spoke the old rancher's vow, shelter and provision in storm and drought, while she offered the Apache vow of shared breath and mutual respect. Snow drifted over them like fragile blessings. The riders stopped in their tracks, the ceremony binding and sacred, impossible to challenge under any law they honored. Defeat darkened their faces as they realized they had lost her to a choice they could not undo. When they finally turned away, their torches became dim smudges swallowed by the storm. Cole and Nayeli stood alone in the cold, the red cord warm between their palms. She let out a breath that broke into a shiver, and he led her back to the cabin without releasing her hand. Inside, the fire welcomed them as though it had been waiting for this very moment. Cole wrapped his family's old blanket around her shoulders, and she leaned her forehead against his, exhaustion softening her strength. They didn't speak of marriage nor of tomorrow. They sat by the hearth, breathing in quiet tandem, letting the night settle around them with new meaning. Outside, the storm eased into a gentler whisper as though satisfied with the shape of things. Cole listened to it with a strange, tentative hope curling through him. Hope that felt fragile yet essential, like the first green shoot after winter. He didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time in years the wondering didn't hurt. Instead, it felt like the start of something brave. And as the last embers glowed warm and steady, he realized that some winters don't end with the thawing of snow, but with the quiet binding of two lives that had wandered too long without belonging.